A Drop of the Black Stuff by Matt Hodgkinson. The old man walked with a stick. His daughter laced her arm through the crook of his elbow and married her gait to his. Above the hills, the low sun lit the sky. Rolling clouds from behind shot white golden light through the gaps. "Look at that," said the man. "It looks just like a painting." He swayed with each step. The woman leaned in and helped take the weight, and their breath lifted the late autumn sky. "Like heaven's directly behind," he said. The stones on the narrow path crunched at their feet as they walked. "How long has it been since we were here?" he said. The woman closed her eyes and ran her hand along the dry stone wall. 15 years, she said. The man gave a little puff of laughter. "My goodness," he said. "Can it be 15 years? I forget so much these days." He stopped and leant against the wall. The stone was cooler than he expected. It sent a shiver that spread onto his skin. The air had turned damp and was heavy with the scent of the earth, and of those things, the leaves, the ferns and mosses and grass, abandoning themselves to its bed. Away in the field, a single sheep raised its head. Its shabby fleece, matted and muddy, hung down low. The sheep stared at the man with unblinking yellow eyes and ground its mouthful of grass against its teeth. "Let's get back," said the man. "It'll get dark soon." They walked on. The dimming light cast shadows to the side of them, stretching out long and thin to disappear onto the darkening ground. They followed the path down to the field slope to the old flint cottage. Even in the summer, it always looked cold. I'll see to the fire," she said. Her lips were deep red and wet, and her wet breath lingered on the air. The man woke at the sound of a cry, an awful, pained wailing that could have been an animal or a child. "Daisy," he said. He reached for his stick. "Daisy?" The night poured in through the open curtains, and he could smell something charred and sweet. He lifted his hand and cleared the film from his eyes. At the far end of the room, a low fire spat into the grate, cursing its imminent death. He watched it flail and weaken, and then something crashed open the door. "Christ," he said, "you make me jump." Daisy was there, cradling a bushel of logs. The man loosened his fingers from the chair. "How long have I been asleep?" She walked over to the hearth and knelt to lay down the logs. "Long enough, Dad." "I heard something, love. A terrible cry. Didn't you hear it?" "No, Dad," said Daisy. "I didn't hear it." "Oh." The man rubbed the skin at the back of his neck and flinched at the movement. "Oh, I must have been dreaming," he said. Daisy got to her feet and dusted her hands on her legs. "Dinner's ready, Dad," she said. They ate to the sound of their own cutlery and the sound of the fire and the wind. "Did you not hear that cry?" said the man. "No, Dad," said Daisy. "You asked me that." The man let his knife and fork hang down limp on his fingers. "I'm sorry, dear," he said. "These days my brain is a sieve." He reached across the table. "Never get old, Daisy," he said. Daisy took back her hand and dropped her eyes to the floor. "Never get old like me," he said. Daisy nodded and stood to clear the things from the table. "Don't worry, Dad," she said. "Don't worry." "I remember when you were 2 years old," he said. You were toddling along the leas back when we had that place down in Folkestone. There was an elderly couple that sat together on one of the benches, and you just stopped in front of them and out of the blue said, 'Don't worry.' You should have seen the smiles that broke out on their faces. You lit them up, Daisy, you lit them up." He drummed his fingers on the palm of his hand. You always did know how to make people feel better." He looked up from his hands to see her. Her black hair fell past her shoulder blades, past her breasts and down almost to the small of her back. "You've always been such a good girl." She brought back a pack of cards and a candle to the table. The man watched her fingers as she dealt. The nails were still bitten and the crescents lined with tracks of new skin. She dealt her last card face up. "Hearts," she said, and gathered it in her hand. The man picked up his cards. Youngest first. She laid down the 10 of spades on the table, made the card kiss the wood with a snap. The man put down a 6. You sure you didn't hear that noise before, love? She put down the queen of spades, brushed the image's face with her thumb. No, Dad, I didn't. The tap was dripping a countdown. The man blinked to clear his head and fanned out the cards in his hand. I can't seem to... He touched each card in turn as if to give it meaning, to bring the hieroglyphics to life. Which trumps it again? He said. Hearts, Dad. He placed the cards down on the table and stared at the fire. That's me, he said. Dad? The fire. He looked back at his daughter. The candle flame burned in her eyes. I spend too much time trying to remember things, the things that make me myself, but now it feels like that's all I am, just someone trying to remember, just a flame that's there and then it's gone. She gathered in the cards and then the door swung open again and slammed on the wall. I thought you'd shut that. The man lifted his collar to the cold. I saw you. Daisy clipped across the flagstones and pushed shut the door. It's okay, Dad, she said. It's just the latch. He felt the darkness fill the cottage. There's no one there. She crossed to the hearth, took a log from the pile and let it fall into the grate. Time for a drink, she said. She walked away and he lost himself again to the fire. Watched fireflies, sparks burst into life, float onto the flames and then ascend. Daisy came back to the table with a bottle of whiskey, half a pint glass and a spoon. She spun the top and poured a measure, and then tilted the glass to the light. The Guinness name was all but faded, a ghost sign on brick. The man looked from her fingers to her eyes. Shame you never settled down, he said. The tap dripped water in pairs on the sink, beating like hooves or a heart. It would have been lovely to have been a granddad. She took a sip of whiskey and shook her head. Don't, Dad, she said. She met his eyes and he felt the edge on her words. She downed the drink and sat with her head tilted back and he stared at the crook of her throat. There's that noise again, he said. What noise? Don't you hear it? There's nothing there. I know I get muddled, but I heard it, I swear. Her eyes were still sharp. Did you lock the door? He said. She picked up the bottle and filled the glass. There's nothing out there to worry about, Dad. There is, like something is dying. I don't hear it, Dad. She moved to a pocket in her jumper, pulled out a small polythene bag and poured out its pills. She drew them towards her on the tabletop and looked up at the man. He saw the sharpness on her face fall away. He watched her twist the capsules one by one, let the powder fall through the air into the glass, the tap beating time as she worked. He followed her skillful fingers, mesmerised. And then she picked up the spoon and stirred at the mixture, and the chime on the glass broke the spell. Love, what are you doing? He said. It's for you, Dad. What do you mean? You asked me to help you. Help me what? She pushed the hair back from her face. I didn't want to listen at first, she said, but you convinced me. Of what? That it was the right thing to do. She twisted the glass and the liquid seemed to gather in the light from the fire and the candle and send it back like a jewel. You told me it was called the Victorian cocktail, Dad, that people used to do this when they were ready. She tapped her nail against the side of the glass and then brought it in her hands to her breast. No, he said. I wouldn't forget something like that. He put a hand to the pain in his throat. Jesus, can you not hear that noise? That's why we came here, Dad. You said you didn't want to take it with you. Your dignity. You said you wouldn't let it win. He put his head in his hands. He could feel the fire, feel the night, feel her eyes. I don't understand what you're doing, he said. I wouldn't say that. I mean, what about you and your mum? She pulled out an envelope from her bag, lifted the flap, and pinched out a letter. You wrote this yourself. He unfolded the paper and brought it to near his face. He put his head to his brow and stared at the letter. He couldn't remember the last time he felt sweat on his skin. I know it's my writing, he said. I know it's my writing, but I don't remember this. He looked around the room for an anchor, but everything spun and the tap was dripping footsteps in his head coming close. Please, he said, I don't want to go. Can't we just forget this, please? Daisy walked around the table and crouched down beside him, her eyes level with his. I can't forget, Dad, she said. I remember everything. He heard the wailing noise again from outside, but he couldn't look away. The sound and the night and the fire, they were all in her eyes. I'm doing this because I love you. And then she picked up the glass and she drank. No! The door crashed again on the wind, and Daisy walked out into the night. Daisy, come back! He could still feel her eyes staring through to his heart. He tried to get up, but the darkness, it was hot and it cuffed him like flames. He could hear the wailing outside, and the tap was so loud, and it was in his chest, and the night pulsed in time with the beat. Daisy! Daisy! The man staggered to the door. He could see her silhouette in the distance. She looked so small and so small, and then she was gone. No! The man sat up and looked at his skin on his hands, and then everything came to a stop. The room revealed itself in light, and he knew where he was, and his heart slowed down and grew calm. Mags? Mags! His wife turned round and opened her eyes. Mags, he said, I had a nightmare. Daisy was there. The woman sat up and touched her hand to his back. It's okay, love, she said. She stretched up her arms in a yawn. No wonder you were tossing and turning. I thought it was real, he said. I've never known anything like it. He looked out of the window. The morning was bright and blue, and telephone wires sagged across the window like always. He crossed his hands on top of his head, puffed out his cheeks, and breathed. Christ, I was so scared, he said. It's her anniversary today, love. That's why. 15 years. They turned to each other. I still don't understand it, she said, after all we did. I know, love, he said. Unforgivable. He put his arms around her and he kissed her. Jesus, Danny, you smell like a distillery. No wonder you had a bad dream. I don't remember, he said. He moved his tongue around his mouth, swallowed and winced at the taste. He put a hand to his chest and looked at his bedside table. A little golden liquid was still pooled at the bottom of the half-pint glass. The side was lined with white. He felt his heart quicken against his hand, and then saliva flooded back into his mouth. He rubbed at the heat in his eyes and moved himself closer to see. The tiny powder specks ran up the side of the glass through faded letters that he could still just read.